Oh, hello, beautiful listeners.
You can definitely tell by Megan's voice that she is happy, and with good reason.
Yes. So we're recording on November 8th. That is a Sunday. And so for those of you who don't know, if you live under a rock or just haven't been paying attention to the news, the United States of America just elected a new president-elect, Mr. Joe Biden, with Vice President Kamala Harris. Words cannot express how just fucking thankful and grateful and optimistic and relieved I am. And I think just the world is as well. I might accept out there.
I think also people are just happy to not have to look at the news for a little while now.
Because we have, yes, in a way, deposed a tyrant or a mad ruler, someone who rules by their own accord and, just was in a different realm. Honestly, President Donald Trump. And I just can't even fathom, come January 20th, having a president and not worrying every day when I read the news, what have they done this time? Yeah. What more could they have done?
What have they said? What have they tweeted? Ugh.
Yeah, and as we were mentioning, Elo and I speaking before we recorded today, I have, felt this weight of shame in a way for the past 4 years. And, whenever I traveled, when we were able to travel, people asking, where I'm from, and I'm saying, oh, I'm American. The first question almost always was, oh, so what do you think of Trump? And, just having the kind of exasperated smile and light head shake, or eye roll. And most of the time other people just kind of laughed and were like, yeah, to not have to deal with that or feel that anymore. It's so nice.
Yeah.
Decency literally won. Yeah. And I mean, it's a long road ahead, but I think it's going to be the opening of a door for great change, necessary change, positivity, decency, respect, sanity, literal factual truth, science, scientific evidence.
Maybe the WHO won't be defunded anymore.
Yeah, and the EPA will be restored to full capacity. And I mean, Biden has already said that the first thing he's going to do is rejoin the Paris Accord.
Thank God for that. Oh my God.
So
that was so dumb.
Yeah. I can't, I've had just a stupid smile on my face since the news broke last night.
Yeah.
So we thought, originally we were going to kind of continue our death theme and talk about Coco.
Yeah, but then
Pixar film, just because neither of us had seen it, and we briefly mentioned it last week, and then Dia de los Muertos, and we thought that'd be a fun, cozy conversation. But yeah, then with the election,
I got a message from Megan being like, "Scrap Coco."
Oh yeah, this was on I think Wednesday when
before
the mail-in ballots had been started to be counted. So Trump was still heavily leading in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona, and I was just if Trump fucking wins, we are talking about despotic and horrible rulers. We're doing it. I was very just kind of ready to accept the worst after having had my heart broken so severely in 2016 with the election and Hillary Clinton. And then with just how long this election took, as everyone knows, I mean, it took almost a week. It took 5 days. We just continue to think, yeah, this is much more in line with the tone of the world at the moment. So we will do Coco eventually. But we just think that talking about horrible rulers or mad rulers is just much more fitting as we say, bye-bye, you're fired to President Trump.
Biden.
Bye. And a quick little digression. I don't know if you saw this, Elo, but in regards to my research, exciting. There was a tweet, and I also saw on Instagram. I don't remember who posted it. and it was like America right now. And then it was a screenshot of the end of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre where the final girl, Sally, who
yes, I saw it on your Instagram,
is looking back and smiling, you know, maniacally, really, because she's just gone through this horrible, horrible experience. And I just was like, okay, yes, everyone feels like we've just escaped like a psychotic killer, which in a sense, with Trump's current death count due to his response to the pandemic, is true, let alone other kind of like racial injustices. But then, you know, with my research on Final Girls and horror and like the cultural moment, I was like, oh my God, look at this. Nerd alert. I'm excited.
Have you saved these posts? Because obviously, like, with how internet works, you'll probably lose them otherwise.
Yeah, I retweeted from Instagram the post with the Sally at the end. So I have that in my Twitter record, I guess.
Maybe
my
take a
history.
Screenshot in case you
accidentally delete it or something.
Yeah, the internet is a weird place. So, I mean, I feel like...
Yeah, no, that's smart. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to digress. I saw that and I was like, that's a great combination of all the things. We did the same thing as last week and we've forgotten to introduce ourselves. So, hi, I'm Megan.
I'm Elo, and welcome to our podcast where we ramble and shamble and talk and talk.
Yes, so Modern Medieval, the podcast. And this week, as we talk about, you know, horrible rulers, there's a good chunk that are medieval. We will kind of toss in a few others that are from the classical era, so like Roman rule. And there's a couple that eke through in the early modern era. But this is in honor of toppling the despot Donald Trump. And yeah. Hello, I don't know, like, how you went about researching this. I just basically in Google typed in like worst monarchs in history and horrible monarchs.
That's what I did.
So
good, we lack originality.
Well, because I also didn't really know how to like phrase it. So I have one list that is 9 of the worst monarchs in history from History Extra. I have one from the history.com, like the history channel, which is 10, quote, allegedly mad monarchs. I've got Ranker, the most brutal medieval monarchs.
Mm.
And then I have 2 that I had personally added to my own list that weren't mentioned in here that I think are honorary mentions. There's definitely overlap in them.
Yeah.
As well as, you know, standalones. I don't know if you have any other different lists, Elo, or how we want to go about doing this.
I think maybe we should do a top 5 and then add 1.
Okay. That sounds fair. So I guess we could each do a top 5, and if we share, then we share. So I'll start just because I have it literally right here in front of my face.
Okay.
Maybe he's on your list, but I have the Roman Emperor Gaius Caligula from...
I don't have him, but yes, I do know about him.
AD 12 to 41.
Mm.
And so, you mean Caligula, everyone I think knows that name, even if they're not aware of when or how. He's up there with like Pontius Pilate and Nero. He's also up there with Commodus, who, if you've ever seen the film Gladiator, Commodus is the ruler in that. That's Joaquin Phoenix's character.
Mm.
The reason why I'm mentioning Caligula is because he was not only a good ruler, he didn't rule for a very long time. He only ruled for about 3 years. But and he was ultimately assassinated.
Mm.
But I've nominated him because of the scandals that he has.
Ooh.
So according to the historic records and contemporaries, he was described as insane, self-absorbed, short-tempered. He killed and massacred on a whim and indulged in too much spending and sex. He's also accused of sleeping with other men's wives and then bragging about it. Trump. Killing for mere amusement.
Wait, he did that? Sorry.
I mean, I wouldn't put it past, but just Trump sleeping with people and bragging about it and then saying it didn't happen and other horrible things. But Caligula also deliberately wasted money on his bridge, which caused mass starvation. And he also wanted to put a statue of himself in the Temple of Jerusalem for his worship because he wanted to be seen as a deity, as divine, and as a god. He was also said to have forced his soldiers to build a 2-mile long floating like raft so that he could gallop his horse on the river. Another story, I don't know if this is really true or not, because I'm not a classicist and, you know, there's always so much confliction. So this is just kind of, I guess, like a, you know, one of those anecdotal stories, true or not. But at a game that Caligula was presiding at, he was said to have ordered his guards to throw an entire section of the audience into the arena during the intermission to be eaten by the wild beasts because there were no prisoners to be used and Caligula was bored.
I find that, you know, it's really interesting when you have like the essential feelings of a monarch be at the forefront of how they rule. So it's kind of like, oh, well, I was in a bitchy mood because I was hungry, becomes like, oh, I was in a bitchy mood because I was hungry, so I killed 200 people.
Right. Yeah, it's just so radically different. He's also been accused of having incest with his sisters, Agrippina the Younger, Drusilla, and Livilla, as well as prostituting them to other men. He has been said to send his troops to illogical military exercises for no reason. He turned the palace into a brothel. And
really?
This is, yeah.
I like Berlusconi.
Most famously, and this is like my absolute favorite element of him and just like a, you know, testament, is he planned or at least promised to make his horse, Incitatus, a consul, and he actually appointed his horse as a priest. Like, that is batshit crazy power move, and I love it. So the horse thing is definitely true, and in the records, the others in regard to like sexual, you know, instances, etc., is, like I mentioned earlier, debatable, especially because in Roman political culture, insanity and sexual perversity were often presented hand in hand with poor government and poor governing. But regardless, that just sounds chaotic. And I also think that when we visualize the Roman Empire, it's very kind of strict and mandated and controlled in a certain way. So I thought that talking about Caligula was just a really fun introduction to horrible rulers and why. When I say number 1 too, it's not like, oh, he's my top choice. He's just the first in my list. So, but you could do it either way you want, Elo. So I'm passing the torch to you.
So I'm going to speak about William the Bad, and William the Bad is Sicilian.
Mm-hmm.
He was born 1120. So William I was a Norman king. By the Britannica, he is considered an able ruler who successfully repressed the conspiracies of the barons of his realms. Bear in mind, though, that he'd appointed the person who, you know, put on said conspiracies. He also patronized science and letters and showed religious tolerance among those who frequented his courts, were many Muslims. And the reason that he was so, you know, considered the bad is because he caused lots of wars, which were cruel and obviously quite violent. And it also meant that a lot of the things that happened, you know how last time we used to speak about Sicily as, I previously speaking of Sicily as a time of like, in the Middle Ages, as a time of tolerance, where he did the exact contrary, and is one of the main reasons why he is known. So he imposed stern punishment on the dissidents, who this time received no help. Later, they were all very glad to have his son come into power.
Yeah, and with William the Bad, isn't he also known for like kicking his 9-year-old son to death? Isn't that one of the stories with him, as well as him imprisoning his daughter, right? Constance, Princess Constance, which I know there's lots of controversy over that and whether or not
he did that. Yeah.
So she was put into a monastery, for those who don't know, and there's a bit of a conflict over if she was forced to become a nun or not. She did end up marrying, but it's just this other thing of like, put the woman into a monastery or a convent, get her away from us. Yeah, he's on all the lists that I have. William I of Sicily, also known as William the Bad or the Wicked. So in Sicilian, it's Guglielmo lu Malu. Is that an actual translation to like William the?
No, it's Guglielmo. I don't actually think so, but you never know with these things. So it's quite interesting to see what names people come up with.
Okay, I was just curious. That's according to Wikipedia, so it could be wrong. But it just said Sicilian Guglielmo lu Malu. I might be pronouncing
Rumalu
it.
means the bad.
Okay, so it does loosely translate. Cool.
So which one's your next? What's your next one?
I'm trying to think. So we, of course, have other like mad kings that aren't necessarily bad. You know, I think that Henry VI is worth a mention just because of Shakespeare. Pedro the Cruel, who was king of Castile and Leon in the 1350s, who is said to have one of the most dramatic moments in the Middle Ages, is up there. He ordered numerous murderers. However, I think that I am going to run with Ivan the Terrible.
Oh, I don't have him in my list.
So Ivan IV the Terrible, he is 1547 to 1584 a ruler. So Prince Ivan Vasilyevich grew up in the court of Moscow, and his life was often in danger from the rivalry of the boyars, or that's what they called nobles. So he had this lifelong hatred of the nobility and a really deep streak of ruthless cruelty. At age 13, he had one boyar eaten alive by dogs. And he was the first like crowned Tsar of all of Russia, so emperor of all of Russia. And he ruthlessly crushes the boyars, steals their lands, and gives them to his followers, and condemns millions of Russians to the permanent state of serfdom, which still has ripple effects today. That's why he's like on my list, like someone who really just, you feel it. One thing, because I also bring him up because of us just talking about William the Bad's name, is the translation of Ivan the Terrible's name. So the English word terrible is usually used to translate the Russian word grozny, and Ivan's nickname. And grozny is Grozny. But that's a somewhat archaic translation. Mm-hmm. So the word grozny reflects an older English usage of the word terrible, as in inspiring fear or terror, dangerous, powerful, formidable. So like a strong hand, not so much how we think of it today in regards to like evil. This name, grozny, is part of the archaic usage of epithets for Tsars and other rulers. We were talking about William the Bad, and you have like William the Bloody and all these other names where they could also be positive, courageous, magnificent, magisterial. So it's like a sense of power. You have like Richard the Lionheart in England. So his use of terrible was meant to be more of like a power kind of play, which I think is really interesting. Also because grozny, terrifying, also relates to another Russian word, grozha, which means thunder or thunderstorm. So
that's interesting.
In Japanese and Chinese, Ivan's name is translated as Ivan the Thunder.
Ooh, that actually sounds more positive than negative, though.
Right. So I just thought that was quite interesting to, consider. Yeah, I mean, the fact that he kind of caused mass serfdom in Russia, and after his death, the empire was like nearly eviscerated, and eventually leads to the time of troubles in Russia. So kind of also the legacy after him is not so great. So that's why
it's really interesting as well, like how Russia obviously has quite a complicated history that's really dictated by like quite terrible rulers, really.
Yeah, I think it kind of really feeds into why the rhetoric of Russia that we have today, and there's also a back loop of like Russia, being cold and brutal and vicious. And I think also because there are infamous characters such as Ivan the Terrible or, Rasputin. And I also always kind of...
the song, the Rasputin song?
In Anastasia?
No.
In the dark of the night, people find you, bum, bum.
No, not that one.
Oh.
There's a techno version.
Oh, ra, ra, rasutan. Yeah.
Oh my God.
And I also just kind of always wonder, in regards to like Russia and some of those more Eastern European states, Hungary, like on my list, I don't want to steal from you, but I have Vlad the Impaler, Vlad X. I mean, for those of you who don't know, Vlad the Impaler is the model for Dracula.
Is he? I didn't know that.
So he's Wallachian or Wallachian. And so Vlad the Impaler, or Vlad III Dracula, ruled in the 1400s, so 1448 to 1477. Dracula means of the dragon. So he's the second son of Vlad Dracule. So yeah, Dracula translates as like of the dragon. So Dracula, in regards to like Bram Stoker, is directly connected to that. And Bram Stoker's Dracula, the film by Francis Ford Coppola, the opening kind of scenes really set and are based off Vlad the Impaler, which based off his name, if you don't catch that drift, he infamously would have the heads of his opponents impaled on stakes outside the castle.
And to dissuade other people to disobey him.
Yeah, and also just like because he was very vicious. And
did you ever watch the Dracula film?
Which one?
The older one, the 19
Nosferatu?
Yes.
Yes, I have watched the German Nosferatu, and I've seen Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. I think those are the only ones.
Yeah, I think those are the only ones that were made, right?
No, there's a lot of Draculas and versions. Like, I haven't seen the really famous one with Bela Lugosi. I haven't seen that one. And I mean, he is Dracula. Like, he was buried in his Dracula.
Was he?
Costume, yeah.
No way.
Yeah. Isn't that cool?
That's so, I mean, also, like, I feel like that is definitely in the mood of the afterlife, you know?
Yeah. And Bela Lugosi is Romanian. So, like, I love that because he's from the origins. But, yeah, Vlad Dracula, I mean, if you just Google him so much, he understood people due to his cruelty, to his wickedness, to his unheard of cruelty and injustice.
Yeah.
And there were lots of stories that spread during his lifetime calling him like inhuman. So those folklore stories that then, yeah, was he on your list? Did I steal him from you?
No, you didn't.
Okay.
No, but it's quite good because now I can speak of Christian the Tyrant, which he's a bit later, unfortunately, because he's 1513 to 23. But like technically, that could be like late Middle Ages.
Okay.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's that kind of cusp where I think it's at the technical end of the Middle Ages into the early modern period, but it's such a pivot moment that I think you could kind of categorize.
Yeah. Okay, please forgive me, public. I hope you give me this one. So he was the king of Norway and Denmark, and he, as a king, in theory, he tried to maintain the Kalmar Union between the Scandinavian countries, which brought him to war with Sweden, which lasted between 1518 and 1523. And what's really interesting, the reason why he's known as Christian the Tyrant is because although when he captured Sweden in 1520, he had granted amnesty to all of the nobility, the Swedish nobility. And so this is what's known as the Stockholm bloodbath. Where he caused the Swedes to rise against his rule, and he just basically killed all of the nobility. And so that's quite interesting as well, because if you're like, you know, that paso doble, I mean, you know, like that kind of like back on your word and causing like a world conflict is something that we can identify quite a lot with right now.
Yeah, well, and actually I wasn't sure if he was going to get brought up, and I had the Stockholm bloodbath on my list because we are literally at the 500-year anniversary.
Oh, are we?
It was November 7th to 9th, 1520.
Well,
and today's the 8th.
I'm very happy I did that then.
Yeah. So yeah, if it wouldn't have gotten brought up, I was going to make sure that was thrown in there. So happy 500 years of the Stockholm bloodbath.
Well, then the election really falls quite well. Except there was no bloodbath. Yeah.
Right. But I guess metaphorically there was a bloodbath, but a bloodbath for justice. But
we're too upbeat for this episode, Megan. this was going to be better if we were both depressed and like pissed off.
Oh yeah, I would have been like vitriolically spitting venom. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention about Ivan the Terrible.
Yeah.
Sorry, looking at my notes and thinking of bloodbath and violence, and you're like, yeah, he wasn't really that bad, you know, serfdom, meh, it's fine. He also had a police force formed with a carte blanche to arrest and execute as they liked. So just like, have fun, go at it. He had the city of Novgorod violently sacked and its inhabitants massacred because he just distrusted the city, and started a series of ultimately unsuccessful wars with Russia's neighbors. He beat up his own pregnant daughter-in-law and killed his son in a fit of rage. So he did do some, you know, good things, and in many ways he was seen as an able ruler, but his ruthlessness, paranoia, and taste for blood put him on that list. So literal bloodbaths here and there throughout history, all over.
I mean, also, it's really interesting because I feel like, obviously, in my mind, that just seems like ridiculous that you could get away with it. But then after like these past years of being alive, I'm like, nope, that probably would happen now and no one would know.
Yeah, I guess part of the reason why I also suggested wanting to do this kind of theme for this episode, even though I you know, sent out the beacon or the message to you during a time of despair, thinking that Trump was going to win, but now looking at it with, you know, rose-tinted glasses or whatnot, is kind of, so first of all, this theme of paranoia in these rulers that then causes them to lash out and do irrational and, you know, quite often violent acts and decisions, and just reflecting back on the Trump administration and, I mean, just the paranoia and fear-mongering and the lashing out. It's really fascinating in a very morbid way for me to kind of look at the comparisons and, you know, reading. So these people we're talking about are exceptional examples. There were also some really wonderful rulers throughout time, and also inevitably up until, gosh, probably the 18th or 19th century, if not the 20th, because, you know, we had world wars and other horrible things, but getting power was bloody. It was violent. It was horrible. So even the good people did bad things, you know, like, and I think this is also the split, as we've talked to so many times throughout this podcast, of the romantic medieval and the brutal medieval. And of course, this can also be extended to, you know, times of like Roman rule in the classical era, which of course, you know, we have great thinkers who have influenced Western philosophical thought, you know, and democracy and republics, as well as really horrible people like, you know, Caligula and these other European rulers. I did find it quite interesting in this list. I only came across one non-Western ruler, a Chinese ruler, excuse me if I pronounce this completely wrong, but the Zhengde Emperor of China from 1491 to 1521. So he's one of the most notorious rulers of the Ming dynasty. The Zhengde Emperor was renowned for both his foolishness and his cruelty. He was fond of leading capricious military expeditions and liked to give orders to an imaginary double he called General Zhu Shao, so Zhu space Shou. During the first 5 years of his reign, he unwisely put a senior eunuch, Liu Jin, in charge of most of the affairs of state. And when the two fell out of graces with one another 5 years later, the emperor ordered Liu executed by a 3-day process of slow slicing, to which Liu succumbed and died on day 2. Ming era novels such as The Zhengde Emperor Roams Through Jiangnan cast the emperor as foolish and gullible, at one point enjoying a bowl of rice, gruel he believes to have been made from cooked pearls. But he's the only non-Eurocentric ruler that I came across in these lists. Everyone else is from Romania, Hungary, Russia.
How interesting,
West.
Right? Like, obviously the East Europe, Eastern Europe has always been seen as having problematic politics, and it's interesting that we have more examples coming from there than elsewhere, when it's probably not reflective of history, really.
Right. And yeah, just showing the like Eurocentrism of these lists.
Yeah, as well.
And then the other one that kind of stood out to me is on the history extra list. And so this is the one that I said was the worst monarchs in history. And I had never heard of this ruler until today, which I find shocking, is Queen Ranavalona, the first of Madagascar. And she ruled from 1828 to 1861. So first of all, this is just kind of showing like how geography is taught and perceptions. As a child, I did not know that Madagascar was actually like inhabited by people.
Did you not?
I always thought that it was like just an island of animals. I know it sounds, and it's not because of the movie, just like that was
your perception.
Right, because it was just like never brought up in history. Yeah. Of course, I now know better, and I've known better for quite some time. But
just want to point that out. I do know that wasn't the case.
Right, but learning, I have never heard of this monarch. Have you heard of her before?
No, but that doesn't surprise me that I don't know about her.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, she's ruling during colonial expansion, like the peak of it. And so she was able to keep Madagascar free of British and French control.
Good for her.
She did so by establishing a rule so ruthless that it has been estimated that the population of her kingdom was halved from 5 million to 2.5 million.
That is quite intense.
Yeah, she retained loyalty of the army, the Malagasy army, by imposing regular periods of forced labor in lieu of taxation. And there's a notorious occasion, this is again like kind of one of those anecdotal stories, where she organized a buffalo hunt for herself, her nobles, and their families and followers. And she insisted that an entire road be built in front of the party so that they could have an easy hunt, so they could advance easily. And an estimated 10,000 people died in the process of like executing this job. She faced lots of resistance as well, and at least one serious coup attempt at forcing her to become, more paranoid. So she began to force people to undergo the infamous Tangana test, where the person that's like on trial or whatnot has to eat 3 pieces of chicken skin before swallowing a poisonous nut that caused the victim to vomit. Sometimes the poison nut just like literally poisoned and killed the person, like didn't survive. But if they survived ingesting the nut and threw up, if not all 3 pieces of the chicken skin were found in the vomit, the victim was executed.
What?
So this is a bit more of a modern example, I guess, of like ducking with witches. Like, oh, if they float, they're a witch. Got to kill them. If they sink, they're innocent, but they're dead.
Yeah.
It's just such a crazy thing. And I'm just like, how have I not heard of her? Because like you would think that someone so quote unquote ruthless, that just makes it into history because we have the fascination with.
It'd be interesting. You know how this reminded me of Alice in Wonderland
with the Queen of Hearts.
The Queen of Hearts. It'd be interesting to see really, whether that was at all an influence.
Yeah.
Or maybe, the British Empire has had quite a few ruthless leaders, so maybe that not. But that'd be interesting because it feels like, so distinctly unstable that kind of like the Queen of Hearts in a way.
And yeah, like the fear of painting the roses red.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of crazy because her contemporaries, her European contemporaries, condemned her policies as, tyrannical at best and insane at worst. And this like lasted until the mid 1970s. And then with scholastic revision, feminism, rereading history, her actions have since been kind of seen as the attempt of a queen trying to expand her empire while protecting the Malagasy sovereignty against the encroachment of European cultural and political influence, which I find
that's a bit
curious just because she killed so many of her own people, but because I don't know the actual history, this is really based just off of what I've discovered in the past 2 hours.
It'd be interesting to do like proper
Right.
research on her, because I think there's probably more there than
Meets the eye,
yeah.
meets Wikipedia. But I just wanted to mention that kind of like inversion, which seems quite, flipping the coin over
Yeah.
from crazy and insane to like protecting their people. Just
Well,
because I
it's
think
interesting though, yeah, because I mean, also like in none of the rulers that we've mentioned before have
Mhm.
any of their criticism basically said, oh yeah, they were insane, and like they were all men. So obviously, the term of insanity is always linked to women, same way as hysteria has always been linked to women.
Yeah. Well, some of the men were considered insane as well. But I wonder if her being a female monarch has led to her erasure in a sense.
Yeah,
Um,
probably. I mean, women's surprised.
and yeah, I mean, not to I mean, women are seen as like hysterical and temperamental and yeah, insane. It's not to negate what you just said, but some of the men were considered insane. But I think that they were maybe given more patience or yeah, like perhaps more excuses. It is quite interesting. And yeah, the lists that I looked at of like rulers that were like, quote unquote barbaric or ruthless, all men, all men. On the allegedly mad, the history.com list, there are a few women like Joanna of Castile, who lived from 1479 to 1555. She's on the list, which bless her soul. No wonder she would have been like insane because her story's sad more than anything. So I guess continuing this theme of like men suck and women have been oppressed and, etc. because, patriarchy. So she has a story. So she's also known as Juana la Loca. Her whole family and rivals colluded to keep her confined in asylums throughout her life. So she was born fourth in line to the throne of her parents Ferdinand and Isabella. And Joanna was married off to Philip the Handsome of Burgundy at age 16. When a series of deaths made her heir apparent to Isabella's throne, so of Castile, her husband, Philip, kept her confined after her mother's death in an attempt to press his claim over Ferdinand's, so Joanna's father's land for the Castilian throne. Philip then dies in 1506, and Joanna's confinement is continued for another decade during her father Ferdinand's regency. After Ferdinand's death in 1516, Joanna and her teenage son Charles were made co-monarchs. From then on, it was Charles who kept his mother imprisoned, creating a fictional world to keep her in isolation. When he was concerned that she might try to flee during a plague outbreak, Charles arranged for fake funeral processions to pass by her lodgings, convincing her to stay put and stay inside. A group of rebels freed Joanna in 1520 and said that she was sane and fit to rule, but then changed their minds after she refused to support them and decided to support her son, although he was also sometime tormentor Charles. So I shouldn't be laughing, but that's just fucked up, like on so many levels.
That also is just, no wonder she was insane. Oh my god.
Also, for those of you who are like, Ferdinand and Isabella, this sounds familiar. Why, yes, they are the ones who sponsored Christopher Columbus to discover the Americas.
Oh, well, there we go.
They were also the ones who had victory in the War at Granada, defeating the last Muslim state in Iberia and all of Western Europe. So closing the centuries-long Christian conquest of Iberia. But I don't think I've ever heard of Joanna. And she's...
No, I hadn't either.
And Ferdinand and Isabella are, at least in American history, like names that you know because of Columbus.
Really?
Columbus sailing the ocean blue and then discovering, the Indies and the Caribbean and then America and ta-da. Royal history is just fucking crazy and hard to keep up with. I've been really struggling trying to keep them in track with them, entering into medieval studies. Because there's constantly people like Joanna that just pop out of the woodwork. And I'm
there's
like,
not really that much research on them, usually.
Yeah. Or there is, but it's like, for some reason, you have to like open this magic door to discover like that they existed. So yeah, poor Joanna. I feel for you. I sorry I have like derailed us off our list of like top ruthless people. I have one more
mention
They're not a ruler, but I don't know if you have anyone else you want to talk about, Elo?
No, I think I'm good.
No? Okay. So this is a final woman. Yeah, we've gone into our, progressive feminist discourse.
Classic.
So, before I enter into my final surprise woman, other horrible, ruthless leaders. We've got King Leopold II of Belgium,
Yes.
who,
definitely
1865 to 1909,
Yeah.
and the Free State of Congo, which was basically a
No, that was really bad.
sugar-coated way of saying that this is a personal fiefdom, and I am going to eviscerate this population.
Have you been to Brussels?
No, I haven't.
So right next to the European Commission, actually, there's this park called Le Parc de Cinquantenaire.
Mm-hmm.
And basically they have like a really, really big monument. That is actually kind of like the Berlin one, the what is it called? The main entrance doors.
Okay.
And that was done completely and solely through the harbor of slaves. And the genocide of Congolese people was, when I was there in the early 2000s, wasn't acknowledged, or if it wasn't really talked about. So that's really interesting that now with Black Lives Matter, that a lot of like that history has come back to the fore, and a lot of things have been taken down in Brussels.
One of my really close friends is Belgian. He's from outside Antwerp. I've had lots of really interesting conversations with him about, Belgian apologies and atonement and reconciliation in regards to the Congo history. And it was just a few months ago that I think it's their prime minister, I think that's what he's called, kind of apologized for the first time, but he didn't say sorry.
No.
Like, oh, we feel bad about this. But so it is a really kind of curious, and for myself being American and how America is currently facing a reckoning and atonement, fascinating to see how another country is approaching their colonial and racist history. So, but I didn't know about that
as well,
Brussels,
because for example, France, with the war, this is kind of a digression, but I think it still continues with this point, the war in Algeria. So only recently that like families got an official apology from Macron, families who'd lost like sons or husbands or parents to torture by the French government, that they got an official apology by Macron. And it's so interesting because that was something that, was also kind of like hushed. And then that finally took the forefront, which is I find that like really fascinating how long it takes for an apology to take place, really. Especially
because the Algerian conflict, that was in the 20th century. That was the middle of the 20th century. So that was much more recent.
60s.
Yeah, you would, like Albert Camus, and I wrote about that because he was Algerian. And like that's very in that kind of existential conflict. And like decollage poster work and everything comes out of that. And it's in line also with the 1960s student protests and Sorbonne and everything. Yeah, and it's curious how, as you're saying, it took so long, even though it's closer than the Congo. But you would think that apologies or reconciliation or atonement, acknowledgement, however you want to phrase it, would have already come, because it was more recent. Yeah, it's bizarre, like just how history and those kind of incidents and moments in history are responded to throughout time and like their legacies. Yeah, the final woman, I guess I will say, because we've talked about everyone else that I think others, like our listeners, will be aware of, is the infamous Elizabeth Bathory. She was a Countess Elizabeth Bathory de Exed, and she lived from 1560 to 1614. And she was a Hungarian noblewoman from the noble family of Bathory, who owned land in the Kingdom of Hungary, which is now in Hungary, Slovakia, and Romania. She has been labeled by the Guinness World Records as the most prolific female murderer, though the number of her actual victims is debated and unknown. Bathory and 4 collaborators have been accused of torturing and killing hundreds of young girls and women between 1590 and 1610, so just 20 years. The highest number of victims cited during Bathory's trial was 650. However, this number comes from the claim by a servant girl named Susanna that Yakov Shilvasi, Bathory's court official, had seen in the figure of one of Bathory's private books because she kept track of all the numbers. The book was never revealed, and Shilvasi never mentions this in his testimony, so that's why it's unknown and kind of more in the realm of lore and legend and myth rather than fact. And despite the evidence against Bathory, her family's importance kept her from facing execution. She was imprisoned in December 1610 within the castle of Sich in Upper Hungary, which is now Slovakia. So I bring her up because, 650 girls murdered. That is crazy. But first, because of her family's importance keeping her from not being executed, because that shows the power dynamics, not only in the Middle Ages, and she's in the early modern, but also just through till today, and the sense of immunity and buyouts and evading justice. And again, linking this to our theme of Trump, what's going to happen with all the evasion of certain legal issues in America? People in the Trump administration are going to need to lawyer up and lawyer up fast because...
Yeah, what do you think is going to happen to Trump, actually?
Who knows? I don't think he'll face a prison sentence, but I'm hoping that there will be some major consequences to pay. But we'll just have to see. That's a ways away. So there's that. And I also bring up Bathory because she links with Vlad the Impaler, not only because of her region, but because of her sadistic serial murders. She is known for horribly mutilating the dead, the dying, and imprisoned girls. And she's also known for having vampiric tendencies. There are tales that she bathed in the blood of virgins to retain her youth. And though this is recorded quite a bit after her death and considered unreliable, is if you were to Google an image of Elizabeth Bathory, a lot of them are going to be her bathing in a tub of blood. And she quickly became part of her national folklore. And her infamy persists to this day. There have also been people who have claimed that she inspired Bram Stoker's Dracula, though there's no direct evidence for that. There are nicknames and literary epithets that are attributed to her name, which include the Blood Countess and Countess Dracula. I just wanted to end on her because I think that this vampiric goriness links to what we were talking about in the past few weeks, with death and the macabre, all those, spooky, gory things, as well as what I was talking about earlier when I mentioned Sally from Texas Chainsaw Massacre and her being literally bathed in the blood of her friends, but she escapes. I also just find Bathory's story fascinating because of the people who testified against her and for her. And even if it wasn't 650 girls, she still killed hundreds. And that is crazy. That
is crazy.
I guess this idea of people with power being able to get away with something so
horrible.
Yeah, horrid and atrocious, have to pay a minimal consequence in return is, I don't know. Again, it's the ripple of slight parallels into today. So
it's so incredible because obviously in the present time, you'd never expect these things. These things seem quite far away in the way that they have taken place, the cruelty, the harrowness. But it's always quite disruptive and quite terrifying to think about the fact that actually we've had people in power not that long ago that have done really terrible things too.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a lot to process sometimes. And to think that we have, advanced into times of democracy and equality and decency and humanity, if you will, and then you get slapped in the face with complete negations of that. So hoping for a more positive future, hoping for a change to that, and to not see such eerie, repetitions of history and themes of paranoia and torture, vicious persuasion, trails of blood, literally. Yeah. So, Ello.
So you can find us on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts by typing Modern Medieval Podcast. You can find us on social media. You can find us on Instagram by typing podcast.modern.medieval. You can find us on Facebook, as we have a Facebook page and a Facebook group, by typing Modern Medieval the Podcast. You can find us on email by typing modern.medieval.podcast@gmail.com. And the final one, which, we all know that I'm no good at this, so I'm just going to pass this on.
Yes, so Twitter, you can find us. Our handle is @medieval_modern. Please send us your thoughts, comments, memes, questions, corrections, anything and everything. So until next time, I'm Megan.
And I'm Ella. And this is Modern Medieval the Podcast.